Hey everybody, it's Dr. Levine. This stylishly face masked entry is brought to you by, even though it's not really that nice today, I need to get out of my damn house for a little while. So, ideally, most of you have finished, or at least are like well on your way to finishing stuff about the factions in Saint-Domingue on the eve of the Revolution. This week, when you do the reading, it's going to move into really what changes between 1791 and 1794. Now the quick version is a lot changes, but in order to understand what, I just wanted to quick go over a couple things about the situation before 1794, because it's weird. Looking from 2020, you might think, okay, look, the slaves want freedom in Saint-Domingue. The French Revolutionaries are all about liberty, equality, and brotherhood. They're not about sisterhood. Anyone's interested, we can talk about Olympe de Gouges. She gets guillotined, but side issue. So that sounds pretty good. And we talked about in class before everything left, the Declaration of the Rights of Man sounds pretty good to definitely a lot of free people of color. Also to a lot of slaves, right? They're getting word of this. There's lots of facts and rumor moving around the Caribbean at this time, as a bunch of things happen in Europe that seem to have implications for the slaves and for free people of color in a variety of colonies. Remember, in the Caribbean, Britain, Spain, France all have colonies. So, okay. The ideals of the revolution are attractive to a lot of slaves. And also, they don't join up with the revolutionaries immediately, most of them, because of the weird politics of the French Revolution. So, a couple of things are going on. One, the planters, the big whites, the folks who own the plantations, who mostly own the slaves, they actually are on the side of the revolution, a lot of them, at the start. Because remember, they don't like mercantilism. They don't like the exclusive. They want to be able to sell their sugar to whoever they want, and they want to be able to buy slaves from whoever they want. There have been actually some of the first experiments in free trade in the Caribbean happen around slave ports. Spain opens free trade for slave ships. So, a lot of the planters, pro-French Revolution, definitely not pro-freeing the slaves. Small whites also, these folks, the indigent whites, the ones who don't have jobs, the ones who are the actual employees on the plantations, the overseers, that sort of folks. They also tend to be on the side of the revolution, but also for reasons that don't necessarily make them friends with the slaves. They want to see the rich brought down. And it is a standard part of Marxist analysis, which James fits with, and is one of the main trends of analysis of the French Revolution, to look at the way in which racism is used to keep poor people from banding together against the rich. So, for a lot of these small whites, their life is not going that well. And also, the one thing they've got to hold on to is that at least they're white. They have that social status, and they don't want to give it up. And in their view, the revolution is not about that. The revolution is about getting rid of these economic structures that have kept them poor, unfairly, they think. One of their big targets, actually, they're not friends of the slaves, and one of their big targets, I think we talked about in the class, is the free people of color, especially the wealthy free people of color. If you're a poor small white, relatively poor small white, these are the people who are probably going to piss you off the most, because not only are they not white, they're richer than you. And the French Revolution seems like a really good time for them to join the revolution and push it in the direction of killing a whole lot of these free people of color and taking their stuff. So, a lot of reason why the ideals of the revolution might sound good to slaves, but a lot of the people who are on the side of the revolution in the colony are not their friends, not people they're going to want to hook up with. The other side of it, so that's kind of the push away from the revolution, the French Revolution. The pull towards the monarchy and and the French counter-revolution is this. Remember, the Code Noir gives a lot of protections for slaves, right? This is passed in 1685, and let me be real super clear about this. It does not make being a slave a good thing, right? It's not all happiness and joy, and definitely not an apology for slavery, but it's a lot of protections that slaves don't otherwise have. Minimum food that they have to be able to get. I'm doing hand gestures, I'm not holding this phone far enough away from me to do it. So, minimum amount of food that they are entitled to. They get free if a female, an enslaved woman marries a free man. It doesn't have to be a white free man, just a free man, right? There's maximum punishments. If you look in the Black Jacobins, I know a couple of you have linked to this already, the Lejeune case that comes up, this is also not just a lie, right? There are protections against maximum punishments, and the French bureaucracy actually does try to enforce these from time to time. Basically, the French bureaucracy is not always powerful enough, right? The representatives of the King of France don't always have enough power to go against the mob. The whites who don't want them to enforce these protections for slaves. But they're there, and people actually do, stuff does happen with them, they're not just idle. So slaves know about this. And given the choice between a lot of the revolutionary whites in the colonies, right? The Society of Friends of the Blacks is not in the colonies, they're back in Paris. A lot of the revolutionary whites in the colonies who see this as an opportunity to make life for slaves even worse, make life for people of color, free people of color, even worse, they're going to go with the king, who at least has protected some of their rights. This is actually a general thing that's been happening. In a lot of places in the Caribbean, the new economic pressures to be more efficient and more brutal are pitting wealthy whites against the monarchy, who, for whatever reason, to break the power of the whites, of the wealthy whites, because of some sense of obligation towards their subjects, tend to have passed some protections for slaves. Okay, so the last part of this that I'm going to explain some pull is, remember, this is 1789. Democracies, as we think of them now, are almost unknown. The only major one around is the United States, and for most slaves, a lot of what they're going to know about the United States is it's a slave-holding society. Not a good advertisement for democracy if you're a slave. Sorry, don't want to get hit by a car while I'm trying to explain this. So, also what they knew, remember a lot of these slaves are coming from Africa. Kingship is a pretty common structure of governance in Africa. There's a lot to be said about small d democratic elements in kingship. If you're interested, there's a guy named Kwasi Wiredu that's done a lot of research and discussion about the consensual elements of Ashanti kingship in what's now Ghana. But still, the idea that there's a king at the top of the government is not necessarily going to be seen as a bad thing in the same way that we do now. Not by people coming from Africa, not by a lot of Europeans, right? This is the system that they're used to, right? That they know. And in fact, it feeds into some of the rumor mill that's going around in the Caribbean. There are persistent rumors in the Caribbean that it depends on the rumor which one, but some African king has arrived and is going to take all the slaves back to Africa with him benevolently. So the idea of the king being the good guy and being the protector of your rights is not as alien to a lot of folks, black or white, in 1789 as it would be to us here in 2020. All right, last factor that explains some of what's going on with the alliances, and in particular, the alliance between monarchies, kings, and the slave revolutionaries, who we might expect to be on the side of like freedom and getting rid of authoritarian systems like monarchies. Remember, there's a Cold War going on between the three great empires in the Caribbean. Also some not as great empires, but in particular what's going to be important to understand is there's a Cold War going on between France, Britain, Spain. This has been going on for a while. All three of these countries have slaves. But that doesn't stop them from using the issue of slavery in their rivals against them. So for instance, Spain has lots of slaves. Spain is not in any rush to get rid of slaves. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, and obviously I'm not somewhere where I have my books with me, Spain is the last of these three empires to fully abolish slavery. But Spain, for a while, is giving political asylum to slaves that escape the colonies of its rival empires in the Caribbean. If you are a British slave in Jamaica, if you can make it to Cuba, you can be granted essentially political asylum. Now, what is this about? Why would they do that? Well, the Spanish crown claims that it's because they want to give asylum to Catholics. The Spanish king is Catholic. Britain is Protestant. For those of you who don't know those terms, quick version, different versions of Christianity, right? But opposed to each other in Europe. Now, that argument, unfortunately, doesn't really hold a lot of water, right? In fact, the French ambassador complains to the Spanish when Spain keeps taking in French slaves, and says basically, look, you guys, you keep saying this about Catholicism, but guess what? France is also a Catholic country, so it can't be about that. What it's really about is Spain is willing to do anything, more or less, not the whole world, but they are very interested in hurting France. France is very interested in hurting Spain, right? So a lot of them are not above giving aid and comfort to slaves and other people who want to rise up against their masters in their rival empires. All right, so this sets the stage for the geopolitical context in 1789. This can explain some of these interactions. Push. Ideals of the revolution are great. Actual people in the revolution, most of them want to keep slavery and make it even harsher. And also probably want to put some of the free people of color back into a bad situation, or at least a worse situation that they're in. 2, the King of France is seen by a lot of slaves as protector of the limited rights that they have under the current system. 3, geopolitical situation means that other monarchs, including British king, Spanish king, are going to be friendly to the slaves in a way that you might think they wouldn't be. All of this leads up to 2 things. 1, lots of the free people of color, and lots of the slave revolutionaries, once the slave revolution starts in 1791, join up with monarchs. They either ally themselves with the royalists inside the French government, who still support the king against the revolution, or they ally themselves with rival powers kings. So many of them join the Spanish. The Spanish are super happy to bring in revolutionary slaves from French colonies and give them training, weapons, and equipment. In fact, they give Toussaint Louverture a commission as a Spanish officer. So he fights with the Spanish for a while in their army. Because remember, Spain is camped out on the other half of the island. They would love to have the whole island. All that good sugar wealth that France is currently hoarding. And that's why you end up with what might seem ideologically like a weird situation, which is most of the non-whites, most of the people fighting for freedom for slaves and for an end to the racist system that France has set up, are not on the side of liberty, equality, and fraternity at the start. They are on the side of let's keep kings. And it's all about where their interests lie, very little about the ideals that people say that they are fighting for. All of that changes in 1794. 1793, the King of France and the Queen of France famously are guillotined. Spoilers for the French Revolution. Lots of people are going to get guillotined. That turns the Cold War into a hot war. It leads to chaos among the people who are in charge of the French Revolution. It will ultimately lead to the rise of the Jacobins and to the abolition of slavery in France. And that's going to change the whole story for who the slave revolutionaries like Toussaint are allied with. And that is the story that you're going to be reading about in the readings for this week.